Welcome, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Welcome to Valora's Universal Auto Classification webinar series. We're kicking off a new series this year, 2019. This is the inaugural presentation for that. We still have a few people joining us, and we also have people joining from all over the world. So I appreciate those of you who are waking up in the middle of the night just to attend this. So thank you very much. Everybody's been muted. If you have a question that you'd like us to answer, please type it into the chat area, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can. We're also going to be running some polls throughout this session. We'd love it if you would complete the poll and let us know a little bit about you. Why don't we do one right now while the last stragglers come on? So we would like to know who you all are and what type of organization you represent. So please go ahead and click in. Let us know where you're listening from. And I will share the results in real time just as soon as we have them. About 60–70% of you have voted in the poll. Oh, there we go. Let us know who you are, and I will share that in just a moment. Okay, looks pretty good. So here's who is here today. Many of you from corporations, probably corporate legal or records, welcome. But everybody, of course, is welcome if you just want to see who you are. And we have one other poll before we get started. We'd like to know what your role is in your organization. So please tell us what you're primarily responsible for, and maybe some of you are responsible for everything on this list. But let us know kind of what your primary focus is. Not surprisingly, information governance seems to be a hot one. That's good. You're in the right place. And again, I'll share that just as soon as we get critical mass. All right, that looks pretty good. I'll let you know who's here. So that's who's on the line today. Again, a nice mix, healthy mix. So thank you for sharing that. We'll have a couple polls throughout as we go along. I'm glad that's working for everyone. Again, if you have a question or a concern, just go ahead and type that into the box, and we'll get to as many as we can. Okay, we're going to go ahead and begin. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sandra Serkes. A number of you know me, but probably not everyone. So thank you for joining us today. Here's a little bit of background on me. If you're interested, I don't like to spend a lot of time on this slide because it embarrasses me. So read that at your leisure. Everyone will be getting a copy of this presentation who's attended, so you don't have to take notes or anything like that during. Here's what we're going to cover today. Okay, so we were going to talk today about auto classification, but at a much deeper level than we typically have talked about before, and particularly the various applications that auto classification is proving to be quite helpful for, and there's quite a lot of them, well around the order of a dozen use cases for auto classification. And one of the big theories behind this year's webinar series is that it's time to look beyond the single use cases or the point solutions for this technology. Sure, you can use it for retention. Sure, you can use it for rot detection. Sure, you can use it for PII analysis. But the truth is you can use it for all of these things and potentially simultaneously. So that has a lot of ramifications. One, you don't need to buy 12 different tools to accomplish the typical InfoGov goals. Two, you can really boost your ROI and the data that you have under management by using a single tool to cover all of these use cases. And three, you really only have to make your bid or your pitch to senior management or to budgeting once, because all the follow-on use cases are essentially going to be gratis. So that's really the focus for this year, is moving from the notion of tiptoeing into auto classification with a pilot or a single use case, and really expanding that to an everywhere, all the time, evergreen kind of technology, sort of the way, like mobile technologies and everything that we do today Auto classification is going to be 2. And that's really the focus of this webinar series. We're going to start today with an overview and kind of a recap of all of last year. And we're going to then dive into those individual use cases, because any one of them might be a starting point for you and your organization, and then showing how they all weave together as part of this rich tapestry, this kind of global or universal auto classification use. There's going to be a lot of discussion around ROI and bridging the various groups that tend to be involved in information governance: legal, records, IT, sometimes security, compliance, sometimes finance, and being able to provide a common language and a common proving ground that satisfies all of those departments. And then finally, as I said, really kind of outlining and exploring the path that takes us from single point solutions to complete and full enterprise data under management. Okay, so Happy New Year, everybody. If you didn't notice, we're in a new year, 2019, and that often means for people, new year, new budget. If that's you, terrific. If not, we're happy to talk to you with whatever budget you got going on. But this is often the time in all of last quarter to kind of focus on what are our goals this year, what are we trying to accomplish, how are we going to improve from 2018 to 2019. And so this is a very good opportunity to talk about ROI and proving grounds for new technologies. Will this be the year that you really get auto classification off the ground? And for those of you who have already done so, is this the year where it becomes absolutely standard across your use cases? So what do we mean when we say use cases? You could use the word use case, application, purpose. These are all needs that come from information governance. Some are a little bit more security or data privacy oriented. Some are a little bit more litigation or investigation, regulatory oriented. But these are the use cases that crop up all the time. For those of you on the call, you probably recognize at least one of these, probably multiple of these. If none of these have any meaning for you, you might be in the wrong webinar. But probably you recognize these things. These are perpetual needs for organizations. Some are a little more immediate, like litigation, and some are forever issues, like compliance. The tricky thing for most of the clients that we work with is to understand, okay, I get it. I understand auto classification. Software is going to go through and make tags and attributes and rules for me. Got it. What they don't have is where to begin, because this is a lot of ocean to boil. And it can be overwhelming either for the IG group themselves or for the organization as a whole. And so we strongly recommend kind of focusing down on more immediate or more high profile use cases. So I'm going to refer to those as pilots or beachheads, kind of starting points to get auto classification rolling in your organization. Now, a lot of people approach me after I speak or after kind of seeing a presentation to say, where do I begin? What's the first thing that I should do? So I'm going to give you a couple hints here on which are the easiest ones to get started. Just like if you're learning how to cook, you don't suddenly start with duck à l'orange. You might start with boiling an egg. These are the equivalent boiling an egg types of use cases and applications. So I've kind of highlighted 4 on this slide. There are others, of course, and we're going to talk about them throughout the series. But these are, if you really, if you have to go in 5 minutes and you want to know, just tell me, Sandy, where to begin. This is where you begin. Any one of these will serve as an excellent beachhead. And it kind of depends on what your frame of reference is. If the holdout group is IT, and that's who really needs convincing, start with a ROT project. If the holdout group is legal, and sometimes it can be because they just don't trust the technology, or they come from the kind of training of just save everything all the time forever, which really is not proper information governance, start with legal hold. If you're coming at it from a financial perspective or maybe records management, I recommend orphan data. This is data that's been left behind, either from departed staff or from legacy archives. It could be paper records, although I don't recommend starting with paper. Certainly you can, but I don't recommend it. Or it might be from M&A, divestiture, or acquisition activity where suddenly, whoa, you just inherited data. These are good scenarios for starting. And for those of you that might be international and dealing with GDPR or other data privacy regulation, identification of PII, so you know where it is as a starting point, is a very good beginning use case for auto classification. So right off the cuff, these are the areas that I recommend, but any of them will suffice if they're the hot issue in your enterprise. In fact, why don't we stop here? Oh, by the way, if you're lost, here's the link. You will get these slides. Go back to the Auto Classification 101 webinar and watch it through. If you don't have time to watch the whole thing, there's one that's a complete summary. We did the entire 5-part presentation at ARMA International last year in an hour and a half. So if you only have an hour and a half, look for the ARMA one. I'm going to stop here for a poll just to see what everyone's kind of most pressing data need is. So think about that and let us know kind of what is plaguing your organization the most. You may have all of them, but which one is, keeping you up all night? Okay, a few of you have voted. We need a couple more. Again, we'll just kind of see who's got what problems. All right, most of you have voted. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'll share it, and then I will take it off. Okay, so I'm going to assume you can see my screen again. If you can't, by all means, please say so. I've got your little comments up here. Okay, everybody good? All right, so let's move ahead. So lots of different types of data analysis needs. They tend to focus around kind of a RIM or IG use case. That's increasingly common as IG gains prominence in the organizations. So that is good news for all of us. Okay, so why did we call this universal auto classification, aside from being kind of Star Trek fans and things like that? Universal connotes a lot of important things, and they really did fit from just simple auto classification. We really want to get away from this notion of point solutions or something is just a project, because all of those seem to imply a start and an end, and then you're done. And information governance, quite frankly, doesn't really have an end. It may have a start, but it doesn't really have an end. We're going to be governing information and data and content for the rest of foreseeable time. And so that kind of lent a universal feel to it. There were other reasons too. That we are talking specifically about multiple applications, multiple use cases, often happening simultaneously and interconnectedly. We're talking about multiple data silos. We're not just looking at email, and we're not just looking at a file share. We're looking at everything that an enterprise has that might be pertinent for governance, which is probably all of it at the end of the day. Most organizations today are dealing with multiple language. Any multinational corporation has this issue. There are cross-border data concerns. This is not something you can do in isolation anymore. And proper auto classification is aware of that and accounts for that in a native fashion. There are differing regulatory and privacy requirements. Anybody on the phone in California, I hope you're actively watching that legislation about data privacy, yes, in the United States. If you're in Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, they are also kicking around potential legislation. It's not just Europe and GDPR. This is going to be, if you don't think of it already, a worldwide phenomenon. We're also talking about, as I just mentioned earlier, interdisciplinary functioning. That's a hallmark of information governance anyway, but we are talking about technology kind of bridging the gap between what a legal department might need or think, what an IT group might need or think, and then of course what records brings to the table. So we're really kind of in that little triumvirate of expertise. And then finally, this notion of universal auto classification. This is something we're going to get into on this webinar. Yes, there are some solutions out there that will tag once and step away, and you think you're good to go. Information changes over time. New data is being added all the time. Data is being removed, hopefully, in proper retention disposition. And strategies and regulation are constantly changing. So there are some things you might want to tag once, like what is this document? It's a letter. And some things you want to reassess periodically, like is it subject to data privacy regulation? Well, that kind of depends on whether any new regulations come down the pike. So you want to get into this idea that there's a kind of an upfront tag what you can, and there's a perpetual or evergreen or regular cadence to reassessing that content. And you don't want that to take over the universe or be a difficult endeavor. You certainly don't want it to suck up all the processing power in your data center. You want it to be kind of a background, nobody is really impacted, but yet the activity is occurring. So those reasons kind of in totality is why we're calling it universal auto classification. Before I move on, I'm going to just see if there are any questions. I thought I saw some. Somebody said is a great question. It says, isn't the best place to start the one that has caused enough pain for a leader where they will fund it? Sure, absolutely. But hopefully we can kind of get some of this nailed down before there is major pain. But yes, I mean, there's nothing that's as good a motivator as pain. I will absolutely grant that, and spoken like a true kind of e-discovery veteran, because e-discovery is painful, and that often is a driving force for financing. So yes, I would agree with that statement. If you are lucky or unlucky enough to know major pain points in your organization, then yes, you have a major advantage. If you don't, I'm giving you some to kind of go poke around and see if there's pain. All right, let's move on. Okay, so we're going to kind of quickly review how we got here, and then we're going to dive into auto classification, just again with a finer grain analysis than we've done before, and then we're going to talk about this data under management. So in case you had no idea how your enterprise inherited all of this data, don't take my word for it. Take IDC's, and this is their projection. It's from 2015 to see how much data we would be accumulating over time. What's really fascinating about this is the IoT data entering, that's Internet of Things, entering the mix as well. And you can debate whether your cell phone creating data is Internet of Things or not. That's kind of a hot debate. I believe it is counted for in this middle green layer. So again, this is just, I'm trying to give you guys tools, because what I hear from you all is we need tools, we need actionable things that we can take back to our organizations and back to our management teams that we can kind of prove the case. So here's one. This is what's happening. If you're not tracking data growth inside your organization, you should be. This is something your IT team can help with. If you don't have access to that data, then do it for your department or just do it for your file share. Every first of the month, go look at how much data has accumulated in your file share, then look the following month and the month after. You will see the growth automatically. Look in your own email box. All of those will prove the case for you. So this is another really fascinating little graphic that I am borrowing, which it essentially describes what happens in an internet minute. Obviously, they don't have 2019 yet, so I've given you 2018 and 2017 for comparison. This is a little bit B2B oriented, but there is some B2C kind of framework here. So in the last year, that's 27 to 2018, there was a 280% increase in Netflix. Maybe they got better programming. I don't know. Here's Instagram, my kids, and probably yours. But here's business use. Emails, even emails, increased 20% last year. Most people would not think that, but it is. And so for those of you that are in e-discovery, that's a 20% increase in material you're going to have to go through probably 2 years from now. If you're in records and information governance, you have to deal with it right now. So that is really kind of how we got here. Here's some research from others and from our use. Typical large enterprise has 7 different data sources. They are listed here. Obviously, some have many more. Very rarely does anyone have fewer. And most of us are spending a lot of time trying to find stuff, trying to classify stuff, getting it wrong, skipping it, and just basically being an information governance disaster. You guys probably all know that, but again, if you're looking for tools and metrics and things to hand to the skeptics, here you go. So a typical enterprise looks like this. It will have the various data silos. Often still there's paper in Iron Mountain or somewhere else. And there's, whether acknowledged openly or not, there's usually some sort of cloud application sharing going on. Again, either authorized or unauthorized. So what you have here are data silos where the content lives. And most of the silos have nothing to do with each other, which is why we call them silos. We also have the different needs, or here are those use cases that are trying to get at the data in here in a kind of tagged, articulated way to say, hey, I have to, run a legal hold for everything related to such and such topic. Right now, the best we can do is say a custodian is under hold, but that's not entirely the full picture. Really, it's the topic, the custodian, the time frame, relevance. That's what needs to be under legal hold, and that's going to cut across probably almost all of these data silos. So it's a really good example of where the use case is kind of in the abstract, and the silos are A, independent of each other, and B, independent of the use cases. So what you have is this kind of separated notion of where data lives and how it is used. This flies in the face of what we used to do maybe 10, 15 years ago, which was put together an ECM or a DMS, enterprise content management or a document management system, where the idea was sort of like a digital file cabinet. We'll put every single file we own into the ECM, we'll tag it by hand, and then everything will be solved forever. I hope you all are laughing, because that never really panned out. Some of the stuff got into the ECM, some of it got tagged, probably inconsistently, and now we have this total hodgepodge, and life moved on, and we have data in the cloud and data on our phones, and most of us, me included, are using email effectively as a data repository. So we're just like a holy mess between storage and use, and we need something in the middle to speak to both sides. Note that we are looking at multiple use cases down here and multiple data silos in the same breath. That's one of the new things being brought to information governance now, and one of the big promises of auto-classification, because it looks across all of this, what I would call the traffic cop. So the traffic cop is aware of all the data in the silos as well as all the use cases. So you can see I'm kind of building that case for get started with one of these and extend to all the others. I see another question, so I'm just going to bring up the questions again. Somebody's laughing at the notion of the one repository. Yes, me too. Okay. Okay, so everybody's kind of got this picture. If you are a fan of the research that comes out of Gartner, I highly recommend you investigate the notion of content services, which is a phrase that they coined that really kind of encapsulates this picture and says that we do need to separate content from its storage, from its use, and that we need a layer of intelligence in between those to A, be aware of the content as it exists, and B, serve it up, thus content services, to the applications that are requiring it. So this is very much within that kind of framework. Okay, for those of you that I have two versions of this slide. I couldn't decide which got the point across more. You can choose either one. One was the idea that auto-classification is the instant pot of information governance. It does all of these things and many more. All you have to do is push the right button. Or you could call it the Swiss Army knife of information governance. I liked both metaphors, so whichever one works for you is the one. Feel free to leave me a comment or vote at the end which one you think gets the point across more. Okay, so in case you missed the memo, what the heck is she talking about? What is auto-classification? We're going to do a brief, as I said, a brief recap of it. We're going to go much more detailed than we typically have. So this is going to be a lot of information fast. So auto-classification is really the combination of two activities: a rich metadata creation or extraction step, and then an application of hierarchical rules. I'm going to show you both of those. So yes, we're talking about software. We are not asking users to enter data. We're not making cute little applications with pick lists and drop downs and saying, yeah, just fill it in. No people, okay? The software is doing the work. The software is pre-built with algorithms. It's trainable. And no, it's not predictive coding. For those of you that are going to ask, it's a rules-based kind of system. And then it's going to take actions on the metadata and the analysis of what it's uncovered. So I'm going to kind of skip all over this. If you somehow missed the second memo, Valora system is called Powerhouse. I will from time to time refer to that because it is our platform and it's what I speak. But it is an auto-classification platform. Okay, so what do we mean by rich metadata? So there's file metadata, last modified date, last access date, and then there's content-based metadata, like what is this thing? Well, it's a letter, it's a hospital admission form, it's a fax cover sheet, it's a receipt. Okay, those are all examples of document type. There are hundreds and hundreds of attributes, fields of data that can be captured or created or extracted from the content of your enterprise files. And by the way, that applies to paper too. For electronic files, we're going to use a text analysis. For scanned images, we're going to use OCR, also text, but a kind of different format for text. That even includes things like video or audio, such as this recording. We use text to speech to text, to get at text. Again, this is textual analysis. Would definitely fall under the camp of machine learning if you follow the AI circles. And all of these little balloons are examples of the kinds of fields that can be captured or might be helpful in making dispositions about content. So just the blue balloon, for example, is talking about different types of date information that you might extract. Now, I want to stress, you're not necessarily just taking file metadata, you're actually going into the body content of the file to parse that content and understand what's there. So that opens up a huge kind of line of possibilities and inquiries about what would you like to know about your content. There's file level, there's content level, there's hidden metadata. So here's an example of hidden metadata. If you have photographs, digital photographs, almost certainly the latitude, longitude of where that photograph was taken is embedded content inside the metadata of that file. A lot of people don't know that, which of course allows you to triangulate someone's location. So there's a great example of hidden metadata. It's all available either directly or as a parsing mechanism by auto-classification. And so think about it. What would be helpful to you to know? We've historically been held back because we're relying on people to do the tagging, and people get bored and annoyed and frustrated. And so they're not going to sit there and enter 45 fields of data, but software does not suffer from those kind of emotions or drawbacks. You can have it extract as much as you want. And now your wheels should be turning. Well, gee, if I'm going to extract information that's kind of related to legal hold, why don't I extract information that's kind of related to retention or PII or some other use case at the same time? There's no real cost in terms of performance, it's going to be the same VMs processing. It might be a nanosecond slower, but this is going to run as a background process for the rest of time. Why not grab everything that you can? And for those of you that are familiar with Powerhouse, that's Valora's platform for this, we support somewhere about, it's over 600 different fields of metadata. Now, obviously not every client is going to need that, but start to think about what would you do if you had access to this kind of information about all of your enterprise content? How would you be able to manage and organize that content? So that's the metadata discussion. And I mentioned rules. So rules are basically if-then statements. They're a little bit codey, and you can see kind of the interplay between a coding language structure, if-then, and the interplay between the tagging steps. So you can think of tagging first, followed by rules. And when I mentioned earlier, there's a kind of initial baseline setting. That is the tagging step. You can then use those tags for any possible incarnation of rules, including multiple of them running simultaneously, to tell you things like this. So for clients that are thinking, well, we have a retention use case, you might as well get all of these. And this is the whole point of this year's webinar series. If you can justify the use case or the dollars, the investment, or the time, or the subject matter expertise, or the data for any one use case, you can basically affect that for all the use cases. So think about that when you're kind of coming up with what's the leading one, the beachhead use case, and what others are close and would benefit from the same kind of treatment. So once you have disposition rules, you can kind of affect this entire litany. All right. So yeah, if you could do any of these, which ones would you do? Would you do all of them? That might be a lot to take on initially. I would not recommend that in one fell swoop. I would recommend starting with one or two that nicely dovetail and then graduating into the others. All right, so here's what the whole processing sequence looks like. There's a sort of an ingestion or a analysis phase. This isn't really the right word, actually. This isn't from an old slide, because most of the data is staying exactly where it is. Powerhouse would essentially process in place. So files are staying where they are. They're just being kind of visited by the Powerhouse fairy for a few seconds that's learning everything about them. So once we get to some kind of textual processing, then we start with that attribute list. And so here are, everything you could ever want to know. This is the what is it analysis. And then you have what we call disposition or rules. In other words, okay, tagging told me what it is. Disposition tells me what to do with it. So what are some things you might do with it? Well, it's past retention. It's not under legal hold. Maybe you should defensively delete it. Or, wow, this contains 17 fields of PII. Maybe you should lock down this file. Or this matches the request from a DSAR, a data subject access request, and it needs to be forgotten at the request of the data owner. Okay, these are examples of disposition. And so what you see is that tags tend to, not universally, but tend to stay static, whereas disposition tends to evolve. And that's the distinct difference between them. So this, again, now we're getting into a little more detail than we have before. When we start to run files for auto classification, there's an initial or a baseline effort, and that's going to cover all the way through here, which is basically going to tell us and you, what is this content? And you can get all kinds of glorious reporting and data visualization that lays the baseline for what you have. And then you can start to overlay different kinds of rules depending on what your objective or objectives are. So what are we trying to accomplish once we know what everything is? You can think of this first step as sort of a crystal ball that tells you everything that you have. And then this part as like the magic fairy that's going to go ahead and put everything in the right place, or give it the right tag, the right designation, make the right notifications and reporting, and basically kind of like sprinkle pixie dust and make everything beautiful. And I see another question, so I'm going to stop and take a look at that. Okay, there's quite a few actually. Let's see. Guys are giving me the votes. That's great. Between Instant Pot and Swiss Army Knife. That's great. So the question is, how do you handle security levels that change over time? And the answer is yes. In fact, I'm going to get into in a minute this notion of rules. There are different types of rules that can come into play. There are rules that might be static, and then there might be rules that change in different circumstances. So some of the fancier machine learning aspects literally derive rules on the fly by querying other systems, such as security, like a Microsoft ADFS, federated security. And so if you have something like Powerhouse polling these other sources that are being kept up to date automatically or manually, but outside of the Powerhouse environment, Powerhouse uses a connector or an API or some kind of polling mechanism to stay current, so that if anything changes in security, like so-and-so is no longer an employee, or so-and-so has been promoted and now has access to XYZ, Powerhouse can be kept in sequence with that. Again, I like the question because it's thinking about this evergreen data under management notion as opposed to just tag and step away. It's tag and then use that to integrate with other systems and keep current. So the big answer is yes. I have another question. Are all OCR engines the same? Absolutely not. OCR is, if anyone doesn't know, it's a technology that we use to turn an image into text. I have a whole presentation on how OCR works and how that happens and which ones are strong and which ones are weak and how you get around it. So go to Valora's YouTube channel and take a look at that. The short answer is no, OCR engines are not the same. And for this type of analysis, you definitely want sophisticated OCR. Okay, I'm going to move ahead. All right. So I'm going to give you some example, again, just high-level examples of how auto-classification works, because we're going to dive into each type of these use cases in the subsequent sessions throughout this year. I think we have 7 or 8 sessions set up. So there's one on ROT, there's one on retention, there's one on legal hold, and so on and so forth. But just to give you a high-level view, how does this all fit together? So let's say this is sitting in your inbox or somebody, or it's in 700 people's inboxes in your organization. Very common. This is what we call ROT, for redundant, obsolete, trivial. And so when Powerhouse classifies this, it's going through, it's looking at the content, and it's pulling out, it's parsing content and saying, what have I got here? What is this? And so first thing that's going to come up is there's 2 phrases, out of the 7 total words, 5 of them are on what we would call a watch list. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, it's a boy, Mazel Tov. Those are all things that are on that watch list. And yes, it's totally configurable. Sometimes there are curses on the watch list. Sometimes there are indicators of harassment on the watch list. Those can all be different watch lists. And yes, the field could be flagged as such, harassment term, non-business use case term, so on and so forth. There's a lot of customization available here. But for ROT, just as a generic, kind of out of the box ROT, you can understand how this works. The date is 2014. It is now 2019. So whatever this was, it's 5 years out of date. There is no further content, what we would call kind of a really poor signal to noise ratio. Too many graphics for the amount of content. There's 4,000 identical copies. Yes, identical dupes. Hashtag dupes inside the population. So this is kind of lining up for, right now. So far, we've all only said, what is this? Now we're going to get to the, what should I do about it? That disposition. So enough of the tags have been hit, enough of the statistical probability way over the mark that says, yeah, this is junk. That's its classification, and it needs to be defensively deleted. That's its disposition. So again, this is just a little baby step. We're going to get into ROT like crazy in one of the later presentations. This is just to kind of give you a little like amuse-bouche on ROT. Here's a little bit fancier identifying PII. So here is a loan application. No, it's not a real one. I yanked it off the internet, and I really hope to God it's made up. Please do not stalk these poor people if it's real. So same idea. Software is going through, parsing all this content and going, aha, I recognize this sequence. Yes, it's using a regex comparison, but I'm also recognizing the phrase right above it, social security number : excellent corroborating information that says, yeah, this is pretty likely going to be an SSN. It's true that not every version of 3-2-4 digits is an SSN, but there are so many other tells here that we can call it clear PII. The phrase social security number, the fact that it's a loan application, that it has an address, that it has an author, all of the, again, this is some of the interplay and the sophistication now of auto classification. It's not just a pure play pattern match. There's quite a lot of smarts and statistical kind of case building behind the scenes. Even looking for things that we would call likely PII. Why is this likely? Because there's a name on here and an address on the same document that happens to be a loan application. And there's some sophistication here. Their name alone, if we're just on a piece of paper, is not PII. But the fact that these other data elements are present makes it PII. It's a very sophisticated and tricky thing to recognize, and it's something that a lot of people doing this manually would miss. All right, so again, all of the orange is this kind of tag, what is this? And the blue is that kind of disposition, what is this? This has got active PII. This needs protection. It might need redaction. We might need a flavor that's viewable by every Joe Bob in the company, and we might need a flavor, that's redacted out and has a lot of stuff removed, and we might need a flavor that is especially for the loan officer, which of course does not have that information removed or redacted. So we're going to shift gears now. Now that you kind of understand, everybody's, oh yeah, auto classification, I'm good, I understand. And I've talked about a couple different use cases. I want to kind of talk about, I promised you guys that I would do this, how to build and boost the ROI, the return on investment for your organization so that they can make use of that budget line item that they allocated for last October. So we're going to build initially, and then we're going to boost an ROI. So here's how we do it. First off, start with a compelling, what I would call a pilot use case. If you haven't done anything with auto classification so far, these are the ones I recommend you start with. It doesn't have to be this, but these, I can tell you from experience, work very well. You might want to explicitly use departed employee file shares because nobody's really watching that information, and it gives you a little bit of room to stumble or experiment without somebody watching over your shoulder, because the alternative to using auto classification to manage that data is that it's just going to sit there because nobody's going to claim that. So it's a great starting point if you have that as an option. Keep an eye on your pilot use case, whether it's ROT, whether it's legal hold, whatever it is, whether it's just a remediation or a migration. Think about future use cases at the same time. And this is the big change. Stop thinking about it as a one and done, just get started, get the project done, and I'm done. Think about it as a beachhead, as a starting point to say, I'm going to gather a lot more information because there's no real cost in processing or literally dollars to do that. And I'm only going to use, these first 10 fields for this application, but I'm going to store away those other 10 fields for the next use case, because the next use case coming online, all I'll have to do is build a new configuration file. That's Valora speak for a new rule set, and I'm off to the races. I'm done. So while your tagging and your rules case may take, let's say, 3-4 months to do your first set of data, your next application, your next use case, it's probably only going to take 2 weeks after that. And you're going to be off to the races as soon as you build it. So your turn time, your investment time gets shorter and shorter. And then both use cases are actively running for the rest of time. You can just keep layering them on like that. So once you have your compelling use case and you've thought about future use cases, run a pilot. So what's a pilot? A pilot is a small-ish set of data. We've seen pilots that range from 20 or 30,000 documents to 20 gigabytes, 20 terabytes, whatever you've got. I mean, we're talking about petabytes of data at the end of the day. So whatever constitutes a clean and easy pilot that's big enough to really put the software and the machinery through its paces, but small enough that you can actually deal with it. Because remember, you're going to be looking at results. So do not sign up for 20 terabytes of pilot data analysis if you don't want to be looking at that. So again, be a little bit smart about what your pilot is. And this is the most important thing I can share with you from having done this for the last 2-3 years. Benchmark the results. And what I mean by that is, yes, you want to benchmark accuracy. Everybody's always worried about accuracy. At the end of the day, accuracy is not going to be your issue. I can just tell you. Yes, you have to look at it and you're going to have to check that box and you're going to do a few iterations to get it just so, but that's not where the kind of sticking points are going to be. It's going to be about actual performance. How many VMs do you need to get through this kind of data in this kind of time frame? And we have another session coming up that really talks about just benchmarking. But the two key pieces to benchmarking are how fast and how quick. And they are, of course, at odds with each other. I can get through a terabyte if I have 3 years to do it on a very, very small set of processors, or I could get through a terabyte tomorrow if I have, unlimited processing power available to me. So you need to kind of factor those kind of trade-off things out, and that's what benchmarking during the pilot will do for you. It will say, how fast did a single file take on average? How many files could we get through in it per processor hour? If you're not familiar with that concept, put it into your lexicon, because a processor hour is your trick. Note, that's both speed and time. A processor hour is kind of how you will measure and scale this type of solution for your organization. How many processor hours do you need to get through XYZ? And then also related to benchmarking is think about the reporting. What did you learn throughout the process? What would you like to know going forward? What do you need to convince everybody else that this is a good thing? Do you need to show how much rot was removed? Do you need to show how much storage costs you saved by removing that rot? Again, the more sophisticated auto classification engines, not only can they tag for everything under the sun, they can report on everything under the sun. So think about what it is that's going to make your case for you, not just for the pilot, but for going forward. If you can build an ROI just on the pilot, and again, that's why I've chosen the ones that I did here, then everything else is gravy. So in other words, if you can justify the ROI just, let's say, on the terms of the amount of rot that you remove, just in terms of storage cost, or the amount of manual effort that you saved, whether it's doc review and a litigation or manual labor on the part of the records department or your employees, if you can show that productivity gain just on the pilot, then the rest of it is just gonna fall at your feet, because you might as well just continue doing what you're doing, which is exactly what the software is going to do. Once you've built the pilot, a pilot's going to consist primarily of configuration and processing. Once you get to processing, you might as well just keep processing, throw more at it, keep processing. There isn't a lot of expense or kind of ROI hurdle at that point. You've already cleared it. And then finally, this is the most successful clients with auto classification are doing a really good job internally spreading the word. Sure, Valora's out there and we're waving the auto classification flag, but you guys can do so in your organizations, and that makes all the difference, because when your colleagues see what you've done on the legal file share or some other department's legacy system or whatever group of data that you've identified as your beachhead, they are going to immediately understand what you've done and frankly ask you to do it for them. That is what we've seen. This is a very kind of viral success type of story. Either start in legal or start in IT or start in records, and then kind of blossom it out to the rest of the organization, which will ultimately take you to this notion of data under management, which makes for a very unfortunate acronym. But nevertheless, what we mean by that is once you get through that pilot, your initial and legacy data, once you've kind of extended it out to that first pass, remember we're going to do that baseline pass, then the initial and legacy data is already classified. We've solved the what is this stuff, and it's got all the what is tags. You've looked at retention, you've looked at legal hold, whatever else it is that you've done as your kind of early step. It's already done, the tags are there. And any new data is automatically being included. So how does that happen? Well, Powerhouse kind of recrawls back over and looks only for changes. What changes in the file share? What changes in the email server? So that it's operating at a much lower utilization and doesn't need so many VMs or anything like that, because it's only looking at what's changed. And so there's a sort of regular established cadence to that is keeping everything under management and in alignment with everything else that came before. There's probably multiple dispositions in play that are answering these questions, not in the abstract, but literally with tags and with securities. Okay, who owns this? Who's the custodian? What's the appropriate assessment frequency? How often do we need to check this to update it? And then regular reporting of what you have, how it's being managed, and who needs to do what we would call live data visualization that you have at your center. And we'll do this at a later presentation. We're going to talk about what it means to have live dashboard access to your entire population of data. So that kind of takes us, basically, this is the kind of the nirvana that, to be honest with you, a number of Valora clients are now hitting. The first couple of years of auto classification was really to kind of understand what is this thing and experimentation. That's the pilot activity if you haven't already started that. And then broadening it to use case 1, use case 2, 3. And before you know it, you're going to arrive at data under management without really having to actively do so. That is the ending point of each of these use cases, or the ending state. There's not really an ending, but it's sort of the result of going through these processes. Your data will be under management. Every piece of data, every silo that you put through will wind up under management for all the various use cases that you permit it to assess. Next up, which will be March 13th, I highly recommend that you guys join us. When you get this is actually a link so that you can sign up. We'd love to hear from you. I very much would like your feedback. Go ahead and give it to me. And I'm going to answer the last couple of questions that have gathered since the last time I looked. So let's see what we got. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to run one last poll to see, have any of you changed your opinion about what is your most pressing data analysis need? So now that you've heard me speak for an hour, do you have a different view as to what your most pressing need is? And while that is taking place, I'm going to take a look at these questions and see what else has come up. Most of them are funny. There's a sort of implicit question about changing security over time, and having content, upgrade or downgrade depending on what is happening. That's a perfect example of data under management. So if the rule set for data assessment and for security level assessment is being driven in a kind of machine learning way from another source, all you have to make sure is that that source is up to date or whatever is driving it, and then Powerhouse will automatically be kept up to date. So that's a great example of an application of some sort of tag or status or disposition that's going to change over time. Another one that's just like that is legal hold. While we tend to think things go into legal hold and that's the abyss forever, that's really not true. Things come off of legal hold for various reasons all the time, and then they're going to need to get reassessed because chances are time has passed, and therefore retention and other things may come into play. I have one more question, which I'll quickly hit before the top of the hour. And it says auto classification so I can meet my regulatory obligations for data privacy. That's exactly right. That's a perfect use case for auto classification, both to assess which types of content have data privacy aspects to them, PII, PHI, some other sensitive data, and then to one, kind of report on where those files live so that you have a data map of that, and then two, to lock them down or potentially defensively delete them as in keeping with a retention policy. So that's an absolutely perfect, kind of beachhead use case. Well, thanks everybody. I'm going to share that last poll with you so you can see whether anybody changed their mind, kind of similar to before. I'd like to thank all of you for coming to the presentation and for keeping me on my toes. I look forward to hearing from all of you. Please reach out on LinkedIn or send me an email. Valora's going to be at Legal Tech. If any of you are going to be in New York City in 2 weeks and would like to meet with us or talk to us, please drop us a line for that. And each of you will be receiving a copy of this presentation. And we strongly encourage you to share that and to join us for the next presentation in March. Thanks so much, everybody, and I hope you have a great day.